welcome to our third episode of the Tap HR podcast with me, Trish Hewitt, owner of Tap HR. I'm so chuffed that I get to sit here and do a third episode, and I'm really chuffed that people are listening, so thank you so much for that. If you haven't done already, make sure that you like and subscribe to our podcast. We're available on all the various different podcast platforms, so please do join us. Today I'm joined by Ted Smith from UKHR.com. Ted's a senior HR consultant, he's an author, a mentor, and to be honest, he's one of the nicest guys I've ever met. Ted has recently published his new book, Hidden Disabilities and Conditions, Creating an Inclusive Workplace, and today we're going to talk about some of the key themes from the book. Ted doesn't make any money from the book. He gives all profits and royalties to Macmillan Cancer Support, and as I said, just an all-round good guy. So Ted has an extensive HR background. He's previously been VP of Human Resources at GlaxoSmithKline, Group HR Director for the Medical Research Council, and also Director of People and Places at the Wellcome Trust. His experience is second to none, and today's podcast, as I say, focuses on his recent book. So within the podcast, we will cover the importance of inclusion in the workplace, talk about some specifics from the book, and also discuss just some hot and interesting topics around hidden disabilities. Right, well, thank you so much for joining me, Ted. It's lovely to see you again, because I know it's been a long time. Today we're talking about your most recent book, and could you tell us a little bit about what influenced you to write the book in the first place?
COVID has a lot to answer for. And when the pandemic first locked me down, I decided that it was a moment to get out my pen and paper and start thinking about doing something I'd always wanted to do, which was to write. And I wrote a train blog about my commuting. That went down really well. So then I did an A to Z of human resources, which was very practical for up-and-coming people in the HR field. It's something that used to wind me up when I was at college, that all of the books I was reading were always theoretical. And they had very few practical examples. So it was like, let's do all the different things that people need to do when they're learning the ropes of HR and moving up, and put it into a practical format. In there, I included someone who was blind, someone who had ADHD, someone who was autistic, and it led to lots of engagement with people who were saying, it's a real shame you didn't put in a section about menopause, or were you aware, Ted, that there's lots of us who've got fibroids in the workplace and no one ever mentions it? It would have been good if you had. And it became obvious quite quickly that there was a big pent-up issue around hidden disability. So the difference for me is a lot of people, when you say disability, they think wheelchair or white stick. Actually, though, it's the other way round. In terms of the numbers, there's far more people who have a hidden disability. In other words, something inside them or in their brain that means that they struggle with being able to either keep up with a normal working day or normal patterns of work, as you would describe them for those who have no disability. And for the majority of them, they're actually registered disabled, should they choose to be. They're disabled as far as their doctors are concerned, but they're not even told their workplace, which I think is really sad.
What do you think, I suppose, as HR professionals and as a society as a whole, we can do so that people feel more comfortable to talk about these things that are hidden? Because they impact people massively, but some people suffer in silence or don't let people know what could help them or kind of ease the way that they work.
I think the good news is it is slowly changing. So, for example, I think the best example we've got at the moment is around mental health. If you go back just 10 or 15 years, it was something that people buried away, never mentioned, and never talked about. And it was something that people were almost scared of or afraid of. And what's happened over a period of time is that there's been a movement to encourage mental health first aiders in the workplace, for example. There's been a whole series of organisations that have started to just speak more openly about it. And in several of the organisations I've been involved with, we've had quite senior members of the team, in one case, one of the exec, just saying, I actually get depression, in front of a town hall, and talking about it openly. And as a consequence of that, it gets the whole organisation starting to talk, think about the issue, and slowly but surely you get over that issue and that problem. For many of these others, though, they're deeply personal. So I can fully understand why some women wouldn't want to talk about the disability that they have, which might be related to their sexual organs, their ability to reproduce. It might be to do with the fact that they regularly have something like diarrhea or needing to go for a wee. These are the things that people still, I think, struggle with to just talk about openly. That either with their colleagues, with their line manager, or with HR, and so they just don't. And the long-term thing, I think, is just to say, the more we as employers can say, we want you to be able to be at your best, at your most productive at work, and if you share with us the things that make you special, we can then make the workplace and the conditions under which you work as easy as possible for you. I often liken it to, we're 25 years ago, people would never ever talk about their sexuality. So there would be someone who's gay in the workplace, they'd work so hard and put so many hours into avoiding anyone else finding out that they were gay. Nowadays, people are beginning to be more open about that, they're coming out, and we're just starting to see it with mental health. I'm hoping that over time people can start to talk about their other hidden disabilities as well.
Do you think there's something in terms of leaders within businesses being more open about their experiences as well? So from my experience, I previously worked for a well-known law firm, and we did a number of sessions where our partners were just really open about the mental health struggles that they'd experienced or some of the problems they'd experienced, so that the more junior members of staff felt that we were able to be open. Do you think there's something in that around leaders being more open and almost leading the way for people within organisations?
Yes, and of course the obvious thing to say is it's not always possible if you don't have leaders who have a hidden disability or have a mental health issue, but where they do, it's fantastic, because that leading by example, saying it's okay to talk about it, and let's talk about how we can make the workplace more inclusive for everyone with their different issues that they face, because many people face these different issues, the better. It's going to take a while though.
No, I agree. And I guess going off that point around inclusivity, what do you think organisations can do to be more inclusive? And I say that from the place of, I don't think organisations should be trying to be inclusive because they think that's the right thing to do. Well, not because they think it's the right thing to do, because they think that's going to give them some sort of an advantage over any other organisation. I think they should be doing it for the right reasons. But what do you think companies can do to be kind of more inclusive?
There's so many things, and in fact, when you were asking me what's the inspiration for the book, the whole point of the book about hidden disabilities and creating an inclusive workplace was to try and collect together as many examples as possible from practical real life examples. So we've got stories in the book from people who have a particular hidden disability and then have found ways to make it easier to go to work, to play a part in being fully present at work. And often it's been through collaboration with their IT team, the facilities team, sometimes it's occupational health, doctors, etc. But more often than not, it's just about the conversation that they have with their line manager once they've been brave enough to just talk about that aspect. So I think there's all sorts of things that are starting to happen and move, and the reason why we need to do that is that if we can have people coming to work, not having to hide something, talking about it openly, they can be far more productive. So I want to give you an example, which is I have one person who has all sorts of issues at the moment in terms of regulating her energy levels, and there are days when she's just finds it really difficult even to get out of bed at all in the morning, for example. And what she's developed is a really good relationship with her line manager, that when she feels fit and ready, she will be at work and be present, and she'll either log into the systems or she'll turn up at the office. But that can include weekends. So instead of saying everything's got to be between 8 and 4 in the afternoon or 9 till 5, she's working a completely flexible week where when she feels up for it and is on top of her game, she'll sometimes do something like a 12 or 13 hour stint, for example, get a report sorted, make something happen, but it could be Friday night going through till Saturday. And because she's got that really good relationship with the line manager, and the line manager is cool about it, it's working exceptionally well.
I think there's a real power in organisations offering kind of flexibility to people in that way. Because I think for that, in that example, it's lovely that she's able to kind of move and flex and work around how she's feeling. What advice would you give to organisations that are a bit nervous or scared about offering that kind of flexibility to their staff?
There are some that have got a really good reason to be nervous, and that is that they're providing a client-facing service. So, for example, let's go straight to the coffee shop I've just come from. If people were not able to be there at 8 because they weren't ready or weren't on their game, and there's a lot of customers who want to have a coffee at 8 a.m. in the morning, they're going to very quickly lose trade to the competition. So there are some organisations who have a reception, who have an open facility for visitors, who are providing telephone service or whatever, that has to know that there are always going to be enough people to keep the business operating and running at the times that they're open and available. So for those groups, it's going to be essential that they think about flexibility within a wider team. When you're talking about some of the specific one-off jobs and things, like the person I was just talking about, it's much, much easier because you can be truly flexible. But I've talked now with 5 or 6 chief operating officers, CEOs, who initially were thinking, I can't offer that kind of flexibility that you're talking about, Ted. It just wouldn't work. And besides, we need people in the office. We need people to be engaging and talking. All pre-COVID. And the beauty and the only good thing in my mind that's come out of COVID is now they've all recognised and seen that you can make stuff work. And that sometimes that person who might not be able to get into the office can still resolve the phone call, resolve the issue from their home, and be just as effective because they've got all that knowledge.
What would you say that HR or kind of organisations in general can do to support managers in these kind of circumstances? So managers who are dealing with people who have got hidden disabilities, how can we support them to give the best possible support to their employees?
A lot of it, I think, at the moment is about education and just, or going back a step, simple awareness. One of the things that I've been doing is a series of talks to different organisations, and every time, it staggers me when I'm doing the chats with people over coffee before you go into the room, or the pre-chat with the organisers on the Zoom before the big Zoom kicks off. Very few people understand or see how many people actually have a hidden disability. So, in 2020, the ONS in the UK, so this is purely UK figures, said we had a population of 67 million, and that 14.1 million people were disabled. That's a massive number in this country. And if you do the maths on it, it turns out to be 1 in 5 have a disability. So think of a bus stop. There are 5 or 6 people in that queue. One of them has a disability. But you look again and you're going, no, they don't, because there's no one in a wheelchair and there's no one with a white stick. But the simple thing is, one of them may have a hidden disability that we're just not even aware of. They may have lupus, they might have ADHD that severely affects them, whatever. So you can say, in terms of the numbers, 1 in every 6 has a hidden disability. That's a huge number in this country. So if organisations don't acknowledge that and think about it, then they're going to miss out on the opportunity to reach out and be able to access a huge number of people through their recruitment, through their systems, through their training and development. So what I'm working with at the moment is to help organisations think about, how do you talk about this more openly, say that we're very willing to talk to and listen to people who have a disability, and that we want to be fully supportive, and that we recognise in return we then get access to probably a wider pool of people that we can recruit and hire.
100%. So Obviously your book covers an extensive number of hidden disabilities. How did you go about conducting the research for the book, and what made you choose the disabilities that you've covered so far?
So they were self-selecting. So what happened was that those people who engaged with me on things like LinkedIn and Facebook, once the first edition was, once the A to Z of Human Resources book was published, I would simply challenge them back and say, no, you're right, I haven't got a section on menopause, would you be willing to be interviewed? So I started interviews, and what happened was that I would run the interview, write it up, send it to them, explain that this was the draft chapter. They would make a few amendments, say, I didn't mean that, Ted, I meant this. We would get it to a good point. But it gave them a level of confidence, I think, and a feeling that they were contributing something that might mean that others' pain was less. You know, that people could learn from their mistakes, the way they operated, the problems they'd had with the GP, whatever it was, and that they could pass that information on through the chapter in the book. Now, it is often the case that somebody who has a disability of some kind is already connected to others with other disabilities, and this is exactly what happened. So, the person who I talked to about menopause said, I've got a really good friend who has got this disability. Would you like to chat to them? My answer was always yes. And so what happened was that it just kept rolling. And there was a point where it's a bit like that sort of the hockey stick curve, you see. I was suddenly inundated with lots of people wanting to be interviewed for the book. And it took me obviously quite a while to actually find the time, because I tried to do human resources consulting in the meantime as well, to actually get through them. But it was fantastic. There was a couple towards the end where I was thinking, I really, I'm a bit dismayed that nobody stepped forward with this hidden disability. And I went out and searched. One of the ways of doing that was just to put up notes on my LinkedIn or on Facebook, just saying, do you know anyone who is whatever, dyspraxic, I think was one of the ones. And then suddenly I've got 3 or 4 people willing to be interviewed, and I can put together a chapter.
Oh, fabulous. And you mentioned when we were chatting earlier that you're actually looking at a second edition of the book, so what's driven that?
Well, I think the first book has got out there, it's been passed around, there's lots of people starting to use it, thankfully. They like the practical nature of it. But every so often they'll be reading it, looking through, and they'll say, hold on a minute, my hidden disability isn't mentioned. Why wasn't it in there, Ted? And so I'm learning all the time. If you go right back to the beginning, I didn't have a clue that there were this many different types of hidden disability, or I didn't even know those statistics of 1 in 6 having a hidden disability. Now I do. And I'm learning, and I find it fascinating. I enjoy interviewing people. I talk them all the way through the process, so that I understand how they first came to realise that they might have an issue, how it became diagnosed, then how did they deal with it at work. So it's each of those stories is a step by step to be able to get you there. And then the final bit in each of the chapters is, here are some practical things that the office place can do. Sometimes that's HR people, often it's IT people, quite often it's facilities, but it's always the line manager.
And any tips for HR people who want to positively influence kind of an inclusive culture within their organisation, obviously around the themes of the book?
Yeah, I think it is about it's about showing that you do actually want to take this seriously, and that you want to find out more, and that you're prepared to listen. So one of the simplest things that I always say to people is, if somebody ever comes to you and says, I've just been diagnosed with this, it's not to go, oh yeah, I know all about ADHD, I read about it once. It's to go, okay, tell me how it affects you. Tell me what you've learned from the doctors or the consultants. Tell me more about how this operates and works. And then starting to talk about, how do we talk about that with your colleagues, with your line manager, helping the person open up. So it's to show that they're because I think you have to show first off that you're taking this seriously. Mental health first aiders was a great way. First aiders is another. but also providing some awareness training to all of the teams and the staff, to line managers and to colleagues, to say, we're going to participate this year in Diabetes Week. You know, that's starting to work quite well in some organisations, because it gives people an understanding of what diabetes is, and then it gives them an understanding of the practical things that someone with diabetes have to do during a working day to make sure that their levels don't go too high or too low, and why sometimes they may look like they're not paying attention or something. You know, the side effects. So there's so many things that people can do, but the first is that education and awareness, talking about it, the HR newsletter that goes out saying something like, next week is such and such awareness week. We plan to have a couple of posters or a short Zoom. We've invited a speaker in to talk about this particular illness. Those of you who are interested, you know, please book in now.
I completely agree. I think that awareness piece is really important, and making it easy for people to digest information as opposed to having to go away and search and find it.
Awesome. The other thing that I've been doing is talking a lot to people about there's some very common experiences through the 65 people that I interviewed about initial diagnosis, misdiagnosis, problems trying to get through the health service, etc. And in one or two cases, people have said, thanks for giving that talk, Ted. I've actually now just gone back to the GP to say, I'm bothered by this, I really want to talk about it again, or I'd like a second opinion. And is it okay to just share that briefly?
Yeah, of course.
So, the common thing is, you go in online these days, on the phone, sometimes person to person, with the GP, and you say, I've got this issue. And the GP only will listen to what you tell them. So if you just say, the presenting issue is this cough or this stomachache, or they will run through a pattern of things to deal with that. So it might be that they'll be thinking on the stomachache, right, first of all, we just need to make sure it isn't constipation. So why don't you try a laxative, and then we'll go from there. So come back to me in 2 weeks' time. And it's often the case, and I've heard these as real stories. This is not me making this up. You know, so sounds like constipation because they're trying to do it now on the phone rather than person to person. Try a laxative, see how that goes. If everything's cleared up in a couple of weeks, let the surgery know, and we'll tick it off. If it still hurts, come back in 2 weeks' time. Now, I'm talking to you about that particular one because when they came back, it was like they still were just talking about this one presenting problem. But the reality was they had 4 or 5 other things as well that were wrong with them. And it was only when they turned up at the doctor's surgery that the doctor said, actually, I'm a little bit concerned, you're mildly jaundiced, and there's a couple of, sallow eyes, there's a few other things. I want some blood tests done, I want to do this. And it was only then that it started down the proper line of getting a diagnosis. So it's persistence is important. And that person, if what she said to me was, if I'd said right at the beginning in the first consultation, it's not just a tummy pain, but actually I've got bags under my eyes, I've got